Hello geeks and ghouls, this is May, and there is something called Horror Mayhem that is running on BookTube, and it's about reading one horror story or horror book per week based on a theme. The originators of this read-along are The Book is Bryant's, and there are a ton of co-hosts there that I'm not prepared to say who they are. So week one, the theme of week one was supernatural horror or creatures or cryptids, and so for that week, for week one, I picked this book, Out of the Night by Patrick Whalen. That was a cover by. I found it in a used bookstore in Athens, and this was the cover, and I was like, I snapped it, because you see this cover and you know exactly what this book is supposed to be. And upon reading it, I can say that yes, what you see on the cover is exactly what this book is. It's no fake marketing. It wasn't one of those books that was not exactly supernatural horror, but you slapped a horror cover on it to sell it, because Stephen King was selling back in 1990 when it was published, and so you have to have books like that despite of their content. No, this is pure unadulterated supernatural horror, and also it's not a good book. It happens, I know. The cover never lies, but is not indicative of the quality. And this book, Out of the Night, I think it was the debut of Patrick Whalen. He also wrote a book called The Monastery. I'm not quite sure what else did he write. It's not a name I'm familiar with. It was published by Pocket Books, and there is the best part of this book is its advertisement of Mine by Robert R. McCammon. That was an amazing thriller, and that's the sad part. So we have this small California town called Ravenna, where a century ago there was this lynching event. 6 gypsies, that's how they're mentioned in the book, moved in a caravan back in 1889, and then people started dying mysteriously. 2 boys disappeared, so the nice people of Ravenna lynched them, and they found out that they were monsters hung from a tree, so they buried them deep, and they didn't notice that together with them a funeral parlor was built, and the owners of this funeral parlor were the servants of these creatures. So a century later, people start disappearing in this town, people start dying in mysterious ways, and it's down to the sheriff of this town, along with a group of archaeologists, to discover what's the cause. Or that's supposed to be the synopsis of this one, because this book does a very bad job at establishing characters, at making you feel who the characters are, and also creating any sort of suspense, because the second chapter is an archaeologist that is in the Middle East, in Kurdistan, which is, I think, is North Iraq, back in 1931, and he is part of a group that is excavating some corpses, and they burn them because they're supposed to be cursed because of a scroll, etc., etc. And this is one of the characters of the book. He comes later, but the main 2 characters that we see in this book are the sheriff of this town, who is this huge guy. He is barrel-chested and very tall. He's a giant. Probably the author thought that maybe a Schwarzenegger-type action hero should play this character. That was a Chicago police officer, and he was injured during an arrest. So he retired and went to the small California town to be the sheriff. And this guy is like the grizzled, very conservative, but heroic conservative, because I know there is this streak of conservatism in this book that was kind of annoying. It was like Wiz.com Richard Lehman, basically. I mean, Richard Lehman has this propolis conservative streaks in his books, but his books are fun. Here it's not so much fun, and I don't expect a book from 1990 to be progressive, but some of the things here were too much on the nose. So he's the good cop, he is great, and etc. But he has to deal with bureaucracy and those very cheap council who bought some puny modern cars that are fuel efficient, not gas guzzlers like the ones he likes. And there's this commentary here and there that you can't unnotice once you notice it. And yeah, there are some sexy stuff too. I mean, there is this early chapters that are kind of homophobic here and there. Mentioning travestites and a local troublemaker harassing two gay men, this kind of stuff, which is not that, it gets a bit better later, but there's some those side notes that are not quite pleasant to read nowadays. And I'm not a guy who is easily offended by stuff like that, so yeah, that should tell you something. And then we have this humanities professor who is recently divorced. He is from Canada. I'm not sure he's an archaeologist, and he goes to Ravenna, this town, trying to reach his archaeologist friend who's living in Los Angeles, who is much older, and basically he is the archaeologist from the second prologue. And on his way there, he gets a hitchhiker in his car. It's a very pretty girl. He is clearly attracted to her, but she's a prostitute. And he's like, no, I'm not doing that, I'm not paying. And the same night, this girl goes into the cemetery and is killed by the creatures there who try to resurrect themselves. Because these creatures have to do some weird sacrifices and people die in freakish ways, so our professor friend is the main suspect because he was seen with a girl, and the local police, the sheriff and the local doctor don't know exactly what happened. So this is why our professor friend calls his archaeologist friend, and he comes over, and we find out that he and the widow of another professor who lives in the town are very aware of the creatures because they have researched that. And as the freaky deaths continue, they try to convince the sheriff and the doctor, as well as a military doctor who is a forensic that's very baffled by the strange deaths in the city, in this town, and they try to stop the creatures. And yeah, there are some very freaky deaths in this book that never quite connect in my mind. I mean, yes, there are a couple decent gore scenes. They kind of remind me of Graham Masterton, but they never get the gore right. It's either not getting too nasty, or you don't feel the impact. And what's the main flaw of this book is that I never cared about the characters. The characters in this book are unlikable. The author has this tendency of telling us about them. We get their life bios, and most of them have tragic marriages with divorces, cheating spouses, which may or may not involve underage people, tragic deaths of spouses, etc. So yeah, at some point it gets funny, because everybody is having a tragic soap opera, tragic life out of a soap opera, and you're like, am I reading some V.C. Andrews book here, which is not good for a horror novel. You should not ask yourself that if you're reading a horror novel, a splatter horror novel of sorts. And we never get into their head. The dialogues are very run-of-the-mill. They're not good. I mean, Richard Lehman has a good ear for dialogue. Graham Masterton has a great ear for dialogue, and also he knows how to detail some grisly murder. And for fuck's sake, that's a book from 1990. You can get super nasty at that era, alright? It's not like it's the 70s where you have to be not too extreme. No, you just sell people blood and guts and sperm and sex. And yes, there is some sex here, but it's very like wholesome. and descriptions are very unerotic. There are some decent freaky kills here and there that, yes, they remind me of the Manitou by Graham Masterton, especially when our archaeologist tries to use a computer to stop the Eldritch gods from medieval Iraq or something, which is not how computers work. And there are some freaky deaths here and there, but the way they deal with stuff, it's like, yes, it's, you know, it's like Graham Masterton with a little bit of Dennis Whitley here, so, but it never quite connects. Those other authors are actually good. Patrick Whalen is not. It's this book is, it's on the rails, alright? It's not exactly going out of the rails. It's on the rails of a horror story, but it zigzags here and there. And not all of the protagonists come out of this alive, but they're never properly established. I don't know who they are. They don't have characters of their own. A lot of the dialogue is cringe-inducing and unnatural, and definitely doesn't feel that it fits this book. It's never funny, it's never lively, it's never enjoyable. The characters feel like props that have to move here and there, and they speak what the author believes we expect to read, and this is why this book never works. So yeah, great cover, fits the book is not good. That's what you get with those unknown nasties. And speaking of nasties, you know what really annoyed me in this book? It's got this huge current energy. It's like, I feel that the author is very judgmental. He's trying to portray the small town, probably in the vein of a book like Salem's Lot, with the vices of the characters and who they are, their lives, how their lives are not great. But it's mean. I mean, it feels very judgmental. It feels like, you get the first victim, this prostitute that comes to town, and her life story, and you get the impression that he looks down on them, on her. You get the third victim, who is a woman in her third marriage, and also you get this idea. And the gore there is kind of interesting. You get all those side characters, and you feel like they're either super nice and great lovers that take care of their women, or you get some flotsam of life that are there to be slaughtered, and you should not feel bad about them because they're bad people because of stupid gossipy reasons. It feels like something the local gossip will tell us about the locals when we get to meet all those characters, and this is not what feels good to me in a horror story. I want to sympathize with the characters who get bad things done to them, not having oh, they deserve that. That's not the energy I want to get in a horror book. So yeah, week 1 was not great, but whatever, I've read it. It's getting out of my bookshelves, and maybe another reader will appreciate it down the line. So how was your first week on Horror Mayhem? Are you doing the challenge or not? And what are you reading? For week 2, the theme is Gothic horror, and I'm reading We Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson, because when I hear Gothic, that's what I'm thinking of. Psychological horror of Shirley Jackson. So see you next week. Stay spooky.